In January of 1820, a Russian naval captain named Fabian von Bellingshausen pushed his ships through pack ice at the edge of the known world and saw something that had no name yet. He had been sailing since the age of 10. He had circumnavigated the globe. He had spent years charting coastlines that no European had mapped before. He was not a man given to confusion about what he was looking at, but what he saw on the 27th of January stopped him in a way that ice had never stopped him before. He made his notes. He recorded the coordinates. He turned the ships around. What he did not do, what none of the three expeditions that independently sighted that same landmass in 1820 did, was ask the question that every one of them should have asked immediately. Who drew the maps we used to get here? Start with the maps, because the maps are where the story breaks open. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis completed a world map that is now held in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. It sat in the library archives for 400 years before anyone examined it seriously. When it was finally studied in the 20th century, researchers noticed something that has never been fully explained. The map shows a southern continent, not a vague theoretical blob in the Southern Ocean. The ancient Greeks had been drawing those for centuries, reasoning from pure logic that a southern landmass must exist to balance the weight of the northern continents. This was something different. The southern continent on the Piri Reis map has a specific coastline. It has river inlets. It has geographical features that correspond, in several analyses, to the actual sub-ice topography of what we now call Antarctica. In 1513, 307 years before Bellingshausen. Piri Reis was meticulous about his sources. He documented that he compiled his map from approximately 20 older charts, including one that had belonged to Christopher Columbus. He acknowledged explicitly that he was not drawing from original exploration, but from inherited source material he considered authoritative. He did not explain who originally produced the source maps or when, or how the southern continent had been charted at all. Those source maps no longer exist. 18 years later, in 1531, a French mathematician named Laurent Fine published a world map showing the same southern continent. Fine labelled it, in Latin, as recently discovered but not yet completely known. The interior of Fine's continent shows a river drainage system, water flowing inward toward a central region. That drainage pattern did not exist on the surface. The surface of what we now call Antarctica is ice. The drainage system Fine drew corresponds to the rivers that flow beneath the ice, rivers that modern science did not map until the 1990s, using ice-penetrating satellite radar, recently discovered, Fine wrote, in 1531. By whom? That is the question nobody has answered. The official explanation is that both maps reflect the ancient tradition of a theoretical southern continent, combined with cartographers filling blank space with intelligent guesswork. This is the explanation that appears in textbooks, in encyclopedias, in every mainstream analysis of these documents. There is one problem with that explanation. Intelligent guesswork does not produce accurate sub-ice river systems. Intelligent guesswork does not produce a coastline that matches the shape of a landmass buried under 4 kilometers of ice, a shape that could not have been confirmed from the surface, even if someone had been standing on the ice itself, because you cannot see through 4 kilometers of compacted glacial ice with the naked eye. You need radar, satellite radar, the kind that was not available to anyone until the second half of the 20th century. The maps predate the technology required to make the maps. That is not a conspiracy theory, that is the timeline. Bellingshausen arrived at the ice in 1820 and reported a discovery. The world accepted it as a discovery. It entered the history books as the first human sighting of Antarctica, and everything before it, the Piri Reis map, the Fine map, the dozen other Renaissance-era cartographic documents that show a southern landmass with features that should not have been knowable, was filed under theoretical tradition and moved past. The question of how the prior maps were made was not answered. It was not even seriously asked. What was asked in the years following 1820 was a different and far more practical question. What is under the ice? That question took a long time to answer, and when it was finally answered, the answer was not what anyone had prepared for. In 1957, Soviet scientists conducting seismic surveys in the interior of East Antarctica detected a mountain range buried beneath the ice. Not a gentle slope. A mountain range, approximately 1,200 kilometers long with peaks reaching nearly 3,000 meters. A range comparable in scale and profile to the European Alps. It had never been seen. It had never been mapped. It was sitting under kilometers of glacial ice that had been accumulating for 34 million years, preserving the mountains in nearly perfect condition, because the ice that covered them also protected them from the erosion that wears every other mountain range on Earth into plains. They named it the Gamburtsev Subglacial Mountains, after the Soviet geophysicist who identified it. The full mapping did not come until a 7-nation international expedition conducted surveys between 2007 and 2009 using aircraft equipped with ice-penetrating radar. What the radar revealed beneath the ice was not a geological curiosity. It was a complete landscape, sharp peaks, deep glacial valleys, river systems, a world that had been sealed under ice for longer than our species has existed, preserved so completely that the researchers described the mountains as looking young. One of the scientists involved noted that we have rock samples from the surface of the moon. We have not retrieved a single rock sample from the Gamburtsev Mountains. The mountains are there. We can map them. We cannot touch them. The lakes came next, and the lakes are where the story becomes something else entirely. In 1957, the same year the Gamburtsev Mountains were first detected, a Soviet geographer named Andrei Kapitsa noticed anomalies in seismic data near the Russian station at Vostok. The readings suggested liquid water beneath the ice. He recorded the observation. The technology of the time could not confirm it. Confirmation came in stages. British airborne radar surveys in 1974, European satellite measurements in 1991, publication in the journal Nature in 1996. Beneath 4 kilometers of ice in East Antarctica, there is a lake. Liquid water, kept from freezing by geothermal heat from the Earth's interior, completely sealed from the surface. The lake has been sealed for an estimated 15 million years. It is roughly the size of Lake Ontario. It is one of the largest bodies of fresh water on Earth, and it has been sitting in total darkness under the weight of miles of ice, in complete isolation from the surface world since before the genus Homo existed. In February of 2012, Russian scientists finally drilled through to the water. What they found in the ice immediately above the lake's surface included genetic sequences from microorganisms. Life, preserved under the ice for 15 million years, still present. There are not one but more than 600 subglacial lakes beneath Antarctica. Many of them appear to be connected by rivers flowing under the ice, rivers channeled by pressure and geothermal heat, moving through a landscape sealed away from sunlight for longer than recorded human history. There is an entire world under there, a world with its own mountains, its own lakes, its own rivers, its own water systems, its own surviving biology. The ice sealed it, the ice preserved it, and the ice has made it unreachable. In 1959, 12 nations gathered in Washington and signed a treaty. The timing requires attention. The International Geophysical Year of 1957 to 1958 had brought together scientific expeditions from all 12 nations in the most coordinated study of Antarctica ever attempted. During that year, they found the Gamburtsev Mountains. They found the first evidence of Lake Vostok. They produced the most comprehensive picture of the continent's subsurface that had ever existed. What they were looking at for the first time, with the full weight of mid-20th century science, was the scale of what was under the ice. And then, the following year, they signed the treaty. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 designated the continent as a scientific preserve. It prohibited military operations. It prohibited resource extraction. It froze all territorial claims. 7 nations had already staked territory in Antarctica, and those claims were suspended, not resolved. It opened all research stations to inspection by any signatory. It placed the entire continent, everything on it and under it, under a framework of international management that no single nation and no private interest could penetrate independently. In 1991, the Madrid Protocol extended the treaty's reach to prohibit all mineral extraction and drilling for 50 years. The mountains under the ice, the lakes under the ice, the river systems under the ice, the biology under the ice, all of it placed beyond reach. The treaty has no expiration date. The 50-year mining ban can only be lifted by consensus of the signatory nations, meaning any one nation can block any change indefinitely. In practice, what was sealed in 1959 has remained sealed. 9 years before the treaty, in 1947, the United States sent an expedition to Antarctica that has never been adequately explained. Operation Highjump was not a scientific mission. It was a military operation, commanded by Admiral Richard Byrd, deploying 4,700 men, 13 ships and 33 aircraft. The planned duration was 8 months. The operation was abandoned after 8 weeks. No official explanation for the early withdrawal has ever been published. Admiral Byrd gave a press conference on his return, in which he spoke about the strategic importance of the polar regions and the possibility of threats from directions that had not previously been considered. Researchers who have studied the transcripts of that press conference have spent decades trying to determine precisely what he meant. The full operational reports from Highjump remain classified. Here is what the official record holds, assembled without interpretation. In 1513, a map shows Antarctica with features that match its sub-ice geography. In 1531, another map labels it as recently discovered. In 1820, 3 separate expeditions cite it, and the world calls it a discovery. In 1947, a massive military operation is sent there and leaves 8 weeks early. In 1957 and 1958, 12 nations conduct the most intensive scientific study of the continent ever attempted and find mountains, lakes and river systems sealed under the ice. In 1959, those same 12 nations sign a treaty sealing the continent from independent exploration. In 1991, they extend the seal for 50 more years. Under the ice, there is a mountain range the size of the Alps that no human hand has touched. There is a body of water the size of Lake Ontario that has been sealed for 15 million years, and that appears, when the ice above it is analysed, to still contain life. The maps drawn 300 years before the official discovery show a coastline that cannot be seen from the surface, because it is buried under 4 kilometres of ice. The prior world did not disappear cleanly. Nothing that large disappears cleanly. It left traces, in the architecture that outlasted it, in the documents that referenced it, in the maps drawn from sources that no longer exist. What Bellingshausen saw in 1820 was not a new world. The maps suggest it was an old one. The treaty suggests that whoever looked at what was under the ice in 1957 and 1958 understood that and decided, all 12 nations simultaneously, without a public vote, without a public debate, that what was down there should stay down there. They called it protection. They called it preservation. They called it Antarctica, and they locked it. What they found before they locked it is the question the researchers keep asking. What was in those 8 weeks that sent the military home early? What was in those 2 years of coordinated science that produced the following year an agreement unlike any other in human history? The continent is still there. The ice is still there. The mountains and the lakes and the rivers and the biology sealed under the ice are still there. And the treaty is still in force.